Hey everybody, this is GGB. We're going to be getting to our college basketball upset today, Thursday edition. Kind of swung and missed on Tuesday and Wednesday, so I'm sitting at 0 points entering the last 4 days, which is a rough one. So I would like to hit today if possible, and if I don't hit, I'd like to get half a point at least. That'd be nice. I can still do it if I don't get anything today, but it gets harder and harder. But let's go over what happened yesterday. We got 2 upsets yesterday. If you did not know, the biggest and craziest of the upsets was 9.5-point underdogs Vanderbilt at home hit a buzzer beater 3 to beat number 6 Tennessee, which huge win for Vandy, obviously. Vandy then, instead of being 4-7, which they would have been with a loss and tied with Mississippi State and Georgia for that spot for 9th place in the SEC. They would have been tied with both those teams for 9th. Now they have sole possession in 9th and are only a game out of 6th with Mizzou, Arkansas, and Florida all at 6-5 SEC records. Vanderbilt sits at 5-6 SEC record. Vandy has a chance in Florida this weekend in Gainesville. If they beat the Gators, then they will move to 6-6. Florida will fall to 6-6. And again, Vandy has a very realistic path to move up these standings pretty significantly. Another big winner yesterday was A&M. A&M, who did not even play. They beat Auburn on Tuesday. Moved to 9-2. With a win, Tennessee was going to match them. They would also be at 9-2, and A&M would be tied for 2nd place. Instead, Tennessee dropped it, fell to 8-3, which put them in 3rd place. Not only that, it puts A&M in sole possession of 2nd place, which is just such a huge deal if you're an Aggies fan. And you have a pretty clear shot for a playoff berth if you're an A&M fan, which is pretty cool. The other kind of weird thing that happened yesterday is West Virginia, the 3-7 Mountaineers, beat Iowa State at home. Now, technically speaking, West Virginia was favored by 3 in this game, but they did win. I'm going to consider it's considered a college basketball upset of the day in the series. So West Virginia wins. They move to 4-7. Still 2 games back on Oklahoma State and TCU, but a chance to make up a little bit of ground there. Another big winner today was Texas. Texas was a huge winner last night. After dropping 1 on the road in Lawrence, Kansas, and Iowa State had a chance with a win to tie Texas for 1st place. But after dropping that game, Texas still sits at 8-3 in conference play and has sole possession of 1st place thanks to Iowa State dropping it. Iowa State, biggest loser, obviously, of the day, not only for the loss, but they went from a tie for 1st place with 8-3. They followed into a tie for 2nd with Kansas State, Kansas, and Baylor, all at 7-4. According to the stuff I'm looking at, Iowa State would lose a lot of those tiebreakers. So not great news for Iowa State. You would have liked to win that one. Big game that they dropped on the road. Anyways, we got 5 games with ranked teams in the review for today. 7 o'clock, we had Iowa, who's 15-8, trailing number 1 Purdue. It's 22-2. Purdue favored by 7.5 on ESPN2. At 9 o'clock, we have San Fran, who's 15-11, trailing number 16 Gonzaga, who's 19-5. Gonzaga favored by 14 on ESPN2. 9 o'clock, we had number 7 UCLA, who's traveling to Oregon State, who's 9-15. UCLA favored by 14.5 on the Pac-12 network. At 10 o'clock, at number 15 St. Mary's, who's 21-4, traveling to LMU, who's 16-9. St. Mary's was favored by 8. And finally, 11 o'clock, number 4, I think. Number 4, Arizona, who's 21-3, traveling to Cal, who's 3-20. Arizona favored by 18 on the Pac-12 network. Now let's go over the standings and how a win would affect both teams. We'll start in the Big Ten. We got Purdue, who's 11-2, facing Iowa, who's 7-5. Not a huge game if you're Purdue. Outside if you want the 1 seed in the overall tournament, it's not a huge deal for Purdue to win this one. It really isn't. They are 3 games up on the closest team, which is Indiana. There's about 6 or 7 games left. It seems so very unlikely that the number 1 seed will not be Purdue, even if they drop this one. If they're 11-3, Indiana and Rutgers are the closest with 8-5 records. It just seems so very unlikely that anyone will ever catch Purdue. This is a big game for Iowa, though. Iowa right now is one of the hotter teams in the Big Ten. 3-game win streak. The only team with a win streak the equal length is Michigan. If Iowa is to win this game, they can move to 8-5. Why is this important for Iowa? With a win, instead, right now, Iowa is tied for 5th place with Illinois, Northwestern, Illinois, and Northwestern, right? They're in a 3-way tie for 5th place. With a win today for Iowa, Iowa can move into a tie for 2nd with Indiana, Rutgers, and Michigan. Now, Illinois, if they can just beat Rutgers on Saturday, or if Illinois can just, they would have been in there if the Minnesota game wasn't rescheduled, and if Northwestern beats Ohio State today, it's going to be a very large tie atop the Big Ten. So big game you're going to also be looking at if you're an Iowa fan. You're also going to be score watching that Northwestern Ohio State game. Big fan of Ohio State today. But Iowa, with a win, can move up to here. With a loss, Iowa falls to 7-6. And not only are they out of the tie for 5th place with Illinois and Northwestern, they fall into a tie for 8th place with Maryland and Michigan State. And you're only 1 game up on Scotty. So, big game if you're an Iowa Hawkeyes fan. That's what would happen with a win or a loss for each thing. Now let's move to the West Coast Conference. We got 2 big games today. We got St. Mary's taking on LMU and Gonzaga taking on San Fran. St. Mary's will have 1st place regardless. But with a loss and a Gonzaga win, Gonzaga's only 1 game out. 1 game away, and Gonzaga does play St. Mary's again, and they get them on their home court. So that's a big game. Huge game for St. Mary's, and it's a big game for Gonzaga today. With a Gonzaga loss and an LMU victory, LMU's still not moving anywhere. But with an LMU victory, they'll move to 7-5. Gonzaga will be 8-3. It's weird because LMU's played an extra game than Gonzaga. They'll make it up at some point. But they would be about a game and a half back if you're an LMU fan. With a loss, though, if you're LMU, if you could fall to 6-6, which would be bad. If BYU wins their game against Pepperdine, then BYU can move into 3rd place in the West Coast Conference. So big game if you're BYU. You're going to be watching you're going to try it. I don't know how you can watch it, but you're going to be score watching at least LMU and St. Mary's, and hopefully you can beat Pepperdine and you can move into 3rd place if LMU loses to St. Mary's, right? San Fran gave Gonzaga a real battle for led almost the entire game until the very last seconds when Gonzaga got a putback to win that game on San Fran's home court. But this is in Gonzaga. So, again, like I said, St. Mary's and Gonzaga, they will be 1-2 regardless of what happens today. San Fran, with a win, can move to 5-7, which they can't pass anyone, but with a loss, they could fall to 4-8, which right now they are tied for 7th place in the West Coast Conference with Portland and San Diego. If San Fran drops this one, they could drop below Portland and San Diego into 2nd to last place. Only Pepperdine would be behind them. A win by San Fran could move them 5-7, and only about 2 games in the loss column behind Pacific and Santa Clara. Pacific plays Portland today, so it's going to be a weird game if you're San Fran, because if you got to think you're probably not going to beat Gonzaga, but if you do pull off that upset, you would like Portland to win instead of Pacific. But if you lose, you would like Portland to also lose. And then Santa Clara is playing San Diego today, so very similar situation you're going to be looking at if you're a San Francisco Dons fan. Anyways, that's what it's looking like for San Fran. Finally, in the Pac-12, we got 2 big important games in there as well. We got UCLA traveling to Oregon State and Arizona traveling to Cal. Both games, we know the likely outcomes. Again, Zona has played 1 more game than UCLA. But, again, if UCLA wins, they're still in 1st place. If the likely scenario is UCLA and Arizona both win, right? I feel like we can agree on that. UCLA would be 11-2. Arizona would be 11-3. Now, in the unlikely scenario where UCLA is upset by Oregon State, Arizona would move into 1st place with an 11-3 record, and UCLA would fall to 2nd place. with a 10-3 record. If USC also beats Oregon tonight, in this scenario, UCLA could be in a tie for second place with USC. Important things there. On the other side of the spectrum, if Arizona loses tonight and is upset by Cal, Arizona could fall to 10-4. With a USC victory over Oregon tonight, they could move to 10-3 and take sole possession of second place. Arizona would be a half game behind with one in the loss column. Now let's talk about the lower ones on the totem pole. Oregon State sits at 3-10. With an upset today, they can move to 4-10. And if Stanford loses to Arizona State tonight, which is possible, I mean, it's not unlikely that happens. It's a very I would say it's more likely than it is not that Stanford loses to Zona, right? As Stanford loses to Arizona State, then Oregon State would only be a game back in the loss column behind Stanford. Good news if you're an Oregon State fan. Unfortunately, if Oregon State loses, they could fall to 3-11. Not a huge deal unless Cal also wins. If Cal upsets Zona, but Oregon State does not upset UCLA, Cal moves to 3-10. Oregon State falls to 3-11, and Cal takes over second to last place. They move out of last place, and Oregon State falls to last place in the conference. Anyways, that's what can happen. Oregon State's not moving with a win. Cal can move with a win, but they also need an Oregon State loss. That's what's it looking like in the Pac-12. Anyways, who am I going to pick for my upset of the day? I was torn on this one for the longest time. This is a half-point day if I've ever seen one. Iowa's probably the best team. Iowa's the best team, I would say, that's not ranked. But I'm not picking against Purdue, especially after a loss. They're going to come back and they're going to just destroy Iowa, in my opinion. Especially at home. They're gonna play with their hair on fire. You don't want to play a good team after they lost a bad one. And that's what Iowa's drawing in Purdue. It's not going to be any of the ones in the Pac-12, that's for sure. Oregon State's not beating UCLA. There's a shot that Cal beats Zona simply because Zona's such a weird team to evaluate for the tournament because they have some very high-quality wins on their resume. But their 3 losses, they only lost 3 games, but their 3 losses are to bad basketball teams. They've lost to Washington State, who sits 5-9 in Pac-12 play, 10-15 overall. They lost to Oregon, who's 14-10 overall and 9-5 in Pac-12 play. And they lost to Utah, who is the worst team in the world at 16-9, but that's probably the only team that's on the bubble even. So Arizona's a weird team to evaluate when you're looking at where they should be seated. Obviously, they've played poorly against inferior opponents, but they kind of fixed that a couple weeks ago when they played Oregon State. It'll be interesting. I think this is probably an easy Arizona win, though. That leaves the West Coast Conference as really the only 2 options. You could go St. Mary. You could definitely do LMU over St. Mary's. That is a conceivable outcome. But I think St. Mary's is the best team in the West Coast Conference. To be fair, LMU's not that far behind. I think LMU's also a very good team. And if St. Mary's is upset by LMU, I wouldn't be all that surprised. But I'm going to go with one you guys can actually watch. And weirdly enough, it's the 3rd highest spread of the day for rated teams. But I'm going to go San Fran over Gonzaga. San Fran almost had them. The Dons almost had them on their home court. I understand that they're going to Gonzaga, and that's going to be a lot different. Gonzaga's a different team on their home court. But I don't know. The Dons have been just a couple, again, San Fran sits at 4-7 in West Coast Conference play, but they gave Gonzaga everything they could handle, and they gave St. Mary's everything they could handle, right? They gave both these teams such a great game. I think San Fran's a team that's a little bit underrated. I think they lost some close ones, and I think they're going to pick up this one on the road. Hey everybody, this is GGB saying adios amigos and go Dons.